Hello, and welcome to Your Estate Matters with your hosts, my colleague Greg Bernand and myself, Nicole Garten of Heritage Trust.
Your Estate Matters is a podcast dedicated to everything estates, including building and preserving your legacy.
If it's estate related, we'll be talking about it. We're having the conversations today that will help Canadians protect their families, their assets, and their legacies tomorrow.
Lillian, tell us about yourself and your journey to being a notary practicing in the Fraser Valley.
I moved here in 2005. Before that, I was a trained lawyer back in Europe. I've done my law degree, and then I was inspired to go into teaching and research. So while I was doing my master's in law and criminology, I was actually in my third year of doctoral studies when I got my Canadian visa. So I had to give that up and move to Canada. And here, because my legal degree and other education was not fully accepted, I had to go back to school, and going back to law school had to be done from scratch. So I chose to go to SFU, do my second master's degree, and become a notary. That happened in 2014, and then I started my practice in Langley, and the rest is history.
So you're really involved in your local community. What sort of activities are you involved in, and how does that impact your practice?
Immediately after I moved to Canada, I realized how big Canadian society is built on the community. And my success as a business was kind of related to that, and I saw how much my business grew because I just jumped in the community, met people, and we met through many events of Fraser Valley State Planning Council and Chamber of Commerce, other things. But my community-driven passion comes from three passions that I have, and like looking through them the other day, I realized that if they're kind of directed, I'm not just volunteering here and there, but I have, I would say, the three passions that I'm mostly volunteering in the community and participate. So one is built on giving back to charities, or you could say, serving, not just giving money, but actually serving with, and that's including the Rotary chapter that I'm part of, my church, my community of other nonprofits in the Langley area with homeless in the Langley downtown and so forth. The second one is mostly about immigration, because I am an immigrant. I've went through this, so when I see families moving here or refugees, so I was the founder of the BC Moldovan Association. We're not that many in BC, but it makes us even harder to connect and pull us together and have some events. And so a few years ago, Langley Immigrant Council was created because we were having booming of immigrants coming to Langley area, and I've been called on, participating, volunteering, kind of like a think tank of, what's happened for immigrants in the Langley area. So I volunteered for a few years there as well. And the last one is education. So I'm passionate about education and mostly financial and legal literacy. So estate planning is the big part of that, but it's most of them are about speaking on financial literacy. I'm starting teaching at SFU notary students in January. I've been on an advisory committee on Quantland Legal Assistant Program, and I'm on the Langley Hospital Foundation advisory committee as well, and things that whenever I started saying no lately because I said yes to too many, but those are the three areas that I'm really passionate about, and I try to help as much as I can.
You're an example of a very successful immigrant to Canada, or the immigration process. What do you think sets you apart, and how can we as Canadians better support new immigrants to be successful and contribute to their communities?
So I don't consider myself special as an immigrant. I think my story kind of resonates with many thousands of stories. Before, I was always passionate about those stories, of people moving to New York with $20 in their pocket and becoming a success. And so what my story stands out is from the amount of obstacles that I had along my way, because most immigrants had barriers in 3 categories. If you want to kind of, is the money. Most people don't come with a lot of money. The second one is the language, and the third one is the community or knowing somebody in that area. So none of those were a good thing for me. I moved here with speaking no English, not much money at all. And then the third one, we didn't know anybody here. And we planned to move to Quebec. So I spoke French. My wife speaks French and English, but I spoke no English at all. I couldn't even ask my way to the bathroom in Frankfurt when we landed first to come here. So that was just an illustration where my English was at that time. But and then I got injured just a year into Canada because I was working labor jobs until, supporting my family and everything. So I think it's just the harder it got, the more resilient I had to be to support my family and, and get back into my career. So I think, character and resilience are built when the going is getting hard, right? So, and I think I would say that the biggest thing that Canada could do better, because Canada has a great program of bringing top talent from around the world, but the problem is that you can't bring them here, but then it's not much done with those education, doctors, lawyers, whatever professions you can think of. I wish there was a little bit smoother transition into the regulatory bodies, could be a little bit more proactive and a little bit more adaptive to that, not to make it too harder. The bar should still stay high. Should I say that? I don't say lower the bar so everybody can jump on the board, but keep the bar high, but just have tests and show that you have the education and the legal English skills as well, and then let people get into business that they were trained for.
Right. Well, we even have those barriers between provinces.
That's true.
Not just from foreign locations.
That's right. And I know there is now in the medical industry there is a need there, but we need lawyers as much as or legal professionals as much as, well, maybe not as much as doctors, but maybe it's also important for this country.
Well, let's talk about that. So tell us what a notary public is and how that differs from being a lawyer. And I understand being a notary is a very ancient profession, and tell us what that involves.
Yeah, and so on West Coast, notaries actually were having a big tradition, because I'm assuming all the ports were opening, and you had to document all the transactions, and I'm really proud. Being, I really wanted to have my legal education, accept and be a lawyer, but I actually love for 10 years being a notary public, seeing the tradition of trust and how people love us and how once in history they saved us when, the whole system didn't want notaries anymore. Like the society, British Columbians voted, and then they saved us in a way. So that means a lot to us. The trust. We try to keep that and make sure the people still inspire trust to any transactions with us. Although there are some myths out there, what lawyers, notaries can do. And it's sad to say sometimes among professionals. So one of the myths is that notaries cannot give legal advice, which is kind of doesn't make sense. If we do wills and do real estate conveyancing, mortgages, how can you prepare a file without actually give legal advice? And the law says specifically that notaries have to give legal advice on the matters that we practice. And those are conveyancing, as I said, mortgages, wills, power of attorney. The second difference is, let's say in the estate planning area, we do simpler wills, obviously. We don't do complex testamentary trusts. And so there is room for people to choose between a lawyer and notary on that regard. And and we're not that expensive, I think, right?
Okay, so the regulatory landscape is in flux in BC between the professions, and currently, you've discussed some of the estate services that you can supply to the public. But when you talk about, say, simpler wills, what would you mean by that versus something more complex that might be more appropriate for a lawyer to draft?
Okay. Yes, currently notaries can do full package of estate planning documents, meaning a will, a power of attorney, a representation agreement. We can even act as executors if we're named in the will. So currently, we have those powers to act on that. However, the simple wills will be something that would not have a trust that is somebody would deem disposition will be passed. How do you call it? A class of people at 19, and now it moved to 25. The new changes, although we're still waiting to some clarifications on that, which helps if you want to give your kids your estate not immediately at 19 but 25. Sometimes it makes more sense, especially in the Western world where our kids grow a little bit slower, and 25 or 19 maybe is too early to give a big estate.
So tell us, so Bill 21 came out, Premier David Eby proposed that, and now that the NDP has won the election, it looks like it'll go through. What are your thoughts about one regulator and how that might impact notaries and access to justice?
As a notary, obviously, I'm speaking from that perspective. I think it's great. I like where they come from. The changes seems to be coming from two directions. One is that to address some unmet legal needs, and I think that's great, and also to increase access to affordable legal services. In the past, we talked about access to justice, which sometimes justice may be thought of just going to court. But there's so much more than going to court. And actually, we're trying to keep people out of court and solve problems by mediation, by maybe some documents that can be prepared in advance to avoid people going to court. So I think that's a great idea, and it's again, as a notary public, I'm glad because that can bring some new expanded powers that notaries can do, and that would be the probate services, which we already work in this industry. We work extensively with wills, although we can do those trusts. I think it's great for us to have a little more, so to help our clients as a full package. We can do a little more complex estates, maybe have other little clauses that were not allowed by Notary Act, which is very restrictive, and maybe some dispute resolution. If there are small disputes that we can solve before going to court, I think that will be together with the estate administration. So I think those are the, and I think BC's government's reasoning, I understand it in three ways. One is the access to justice or legal services, which I mentioned. The public demand. I think BC notaries are trusted professionals already, and there is a demand for different type of prices. And I think from lawyers' point of view, is the workload of lawyers will be focusing more on complex and litigation and other things that I don't think there's something that to be lost in that regard.
Now, we've referenced notary fees a few times. Specifically, we're going to talk about like estate matters and documents and such. Is this consistent throughout the industry, or do notaries post it, or is there a package you quote, or is it individual?
All of the above.
All of the above.
So, when I recently I participated as a panelist at the law school, People's Law School seminar on wills preparation, and with me together was a friend lawyer who is practicing in Vancouver, and we noticed that our pricing is basically 50%, about 50% of what a lawyer's fee would be for a comprehensive will. If we're talking about dollar amount, is about $500, around that, $500 to $600 for a will if you do it individually, and $400 for a power of attorney, $300 about for a medical representation agreement.
So something like $1,200
Correct.
for the package.
And sometimes if you're talking about a package, if people are doing all together, which we normally recommend, although people on budget, they try to do just the will or just the power of attorney in the will, then we have a little bit incentives for that as well.
Right. Now you can act as a notary, as you say, as an executor in a capacity. Do you ever act as an agent for, we get this from time to time, a person in the UK that has a family member die here, but it's relatively a smaller estate, but they need somebody to be their feet on the ground.
Well, the rule is a little bit tight here because if you step into doing probate or something that is deemed to be probate applications, we cannot do that. But we notarize affidavits that lawyers prepare or people prepare by themselves. Let's say you are the executor and you want to do it by yourself, but you still need a commissioner of oath or notary public to notarize. We do that. As an agent, that's a gray area. I never done it. So you'd have to look at a case by case. If I have the knowledge and they come for a consultation, why not? I think, and I start from that. Let's say that a client doesn't know where to go. They think this process is so extraordinary, expensive and extraordinary complicated. I say just come for a 30 minutes appointment, 60 minutes appointment. We do a consultation, and we have to realize estate planning is not just making a will. Yesterday, I just had a call because I want to add my son on title. Is that a good idea? And I know it's sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot because we don't have the service, because I tell them that the good, the bad, and so they can make a decision. But that's an estate planning decision. Even if it's normally in my books, it's a real estate transaction because you add somebody on title, but it's domino effect that can affect the estate. So we say, come for a consultation just for half an hour. We'll explain the legal background. You'll make an informed decision before you add somebody on title or make a will or power of attorney.
So this has been amazing. So much information. Are there any final thoughts or tips you want to leave our listeners with?
I think I have just one. So I think my advice to anybody who's watching this or listening to this, don't do it by yourself. Hire a specialized professional. And yes, there are many companies out there that advertise cheap or free wills kits. They may be great. They may have great language and everything like that. But I sometimes joke about it's kind of like buying shoes online without knowing your size. So they may fit you in 1 in 10, but most likely not. And why not? As I said, estate planning is not just making a will. It's a process which I would say, do your due diligence, find the right specialist who knows their thing, and pay accordingly. But at least they give you, I call it real peace of mind, not fake. Because, a will kit may give you some peace of mind, but unfortunately, it'll pay off later, and that's the best advice I could give to people right out there who are thinking about doing their wills or doing estate plan. Hire the right people and believe that will be the best investment they could have.
I do have one more question about accessibility. Now, it's always been my impression that notaries are more able to go out in public for things like hospital wills or that sort of a thing. Could you just comment on that? Or
yeah. And with COVID, things changed a little bit of access into hospitals, and many notaries, lawyers maybe stopped doing that, unfortunately. But I think maybe because our fees are not as expensive, and yes, we do charge travel fees for hours of time that we have to be outside of the office. But in the big scheme of things, I think notaries are more open to that. I've seen still people do that. I do that sometimes, but again, it's based on need. Sometimes people want based on their whim, people just, I'm at home and, but there's not a problem. They could come to the office. I do prefer them to come to the office. We would talk about capacity and do influence, so many things that it's, that I talked before about having a specialist and it's too many things to talk about. But I would say absolutely notaries, maybe some lawyers are still open for that. But that's another advice. Don't leave it to the last minute because capacity may be a problem or nobody could accept coming to your hospital to do that. And my biggest problem at the hospital, because nobody wants to be the witness at the hospital, and because there are rules and regulation, and people are afraid to sign documents, and you have to find somebody the next bed, somebody visitor to be a witness, and it's not a pleasant experience, I think.
Okay, thank you.
So how can our listeners find you?
I have 2 satellites location in Aldergrove and Abbotsford that are by appointment only, but our main office is off Highway 1 and 200th Street. So we are in the Latimer Business Hub office, 84 and 200 if you want to visit us. But obviously our website, lcnotary.ca, is the place to find us. And give us a call, book a 30 or 60 minutes consultation if you're not sure, and we can go from there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered individual legal, financial, or tax advice. Make sure to consult the advisor of your choice to advise you on your own circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Estate Matters. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow it on your podcast platform of choice.
Whether you are planning your own estate or you're acting as executor for somebody else's, Heritage Trust can help. Partner with Heritage Trust to protect your family, your assets, and your legacy.
If you would like more information about Heritage Trust, please visit our website at heritagetrustcompany.ca.
This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.